Hello, welcome. Thank you so much for being here. Today's presentation is on the doctor's data HuMap test. This stands for Hormone and Urinary Metabolites Assessment Profile. So essentially, this test is telling us how hormones are being broken down, metabolized through the body. So it's going to be reflecting things like liver and digestive function, even oxidative stress, maybe supplementation utilization, and even enzyme activity. This test is appropriate for both males and females. There are no reference ranges for prepubescent patients. So males, say under 12, females who have not started menstruating yet are not good candidates for this testing. It requires 4 to 5 separate urine samples. You might be wondering how that might compare to a 24-hour collection. That is considered to be the gold standard of urine testing, 24-hour. But if you've ever had your patients do that, you can tell they are quite cumbersome to attempt. It's estimated that up to 40% of patients who try to do those tests do not collect entire 24-hour periods, which can offset the results. So the 4-point collection allows for a measurement of diurnal cortisol rhythm, and whereas a 24-hour, if you're thinking about that, can only provide a measure of overall cortisol production over a 24-hour period. And then we have hormone values measured from a pool of those 4 collections. They do correspond well to a well-done 24-hour test. And so there's pros and cons there, but I would say mostly pros to doing a 4-point collection rather than 24-hour. All of the analytes of the HuMap profile are tested via LCMS, which is a type of laboratory measurement. It stands for liquid chromatography and tandem mass spectrometry. So all you need to know, you're certainly welcome to dive more into detail. I just didn't want to bore everyone with the details of that laboratory science, but it's an extremely sensitive and specific way to measure many substances and really necessary when we're talking about very small molecules like parent hormones or unconjugated hormones in the urine, and especially their hormone metabolites. Those molecules are tiny. This is the first page of the HuMap. We call this the summary page. I know it looks really busy, but I will break it down for you, so do not worry about that. We really wanted to provide you with the most relevant markers right off the bat. So right away on that first page, you can get the majority of information you likely need from this test. The summary page is going to highlight all of the most clinically actionable info in the report. And we determined that based on what was most well-researched up to this date, as well as speaking to many providers who were using this type of testing and taking into account what they felt like was most helpful in clinical practice. So we all know as practitioners, we are always trying to be efficient with our time. Our aim was to give you as much information at a glance as possible in just really the first 2 pages of this report and even the first page. So we'll get to that second page momentarily, but I'll start by just kind of breaking down this first page. I'm going to show you this horseshoe shape first, and I'll show you the estrogen section, the corticoid section, and then we'll talk about these key relationships. So this is that horseshoe shape. It's basically 15 analytes. It's always going to be the same 15 analytes we're showing here. And it's dynamically reporting this. So it's going to look different for every single patient. Obviously, we have the levels that are above the range here. We've got within range here. Technically, upper range and lower range are also within range, but they're more of a functional look as well. And then we have below range here. So this is going to look different for each and every patient. As a little reminder, there's some letters here you can see for each analyte. Those are corresponding to the neighborhood that analyte belongs to, the estrogens, progesterones, corticoid, androgens. We even have an oxidation section. So if you want more information on those specifically, that little letter will help remind you which part of the test to go look at. So here you can see the same 15 analytes populated for 3 different patients on their individual basis. So again, it's going to look different every single time and specific for your patient. Now, when we're talking about our amazingly complex 3-dimensional patients, and we need to represent these levels on a 2-dimensional test report, we have to remember that the colors are great for quick interpretation, but we do want to kind of move beyond just reading them as high or low. So there are times in this report where the low levels, as well as the high levels are a positive finding, actually. So we have to kind of retrain our brain and our patients too to think about this in a different way. Red does not always mean bad. Blue does not always mean bad. Sometimes if we can use the word red as abundant or blue as lack of abundance, I think that really helps the interpretation of this automatically. So please do that as much as possible. I will certainly misspeak and use high and low because that's the way I was trained as well, but I'm going to attempt to use that terminology as much as possible. This is the estrogen section from that first summary page. We're highlighting 2-hydroxy, 4-hydroxy, and 16. So you can see 2-hydroxy here of E1 and E2, 4-hydroxy of E1 and E2, and 16-hydroxy of E1. We're also showing, so this is phase 1, this is phase 2. This process requires methylation to happen. So we're showing methylation activity here of estrone because it's the most clinically supported in the research. We also have boxes here showing the breakdown and comparison of the percentage of estrone. So all of these will equal 100%, but showing just the comparison to one another. And then this is the another estrogen section I wanted to show you. And I tend to think of these sections here as like a car up on like in a car shop lifted up. So these are the front tires, front tire of estrone, front tire of estradiol, and then the back tires here. This is your 2-hydroxy Toyota Prius. It's pretty safe, it's stable, it's dependable. You don't have to worry about that too much. This one, this 4-hydroxy, is more like a race car. It's a little more dangerous. We want to make sure that the back tires have quite a bit of weight in them. Race cars tend to be rear-wheel drive to try to balance the power of that very powerful engine on the front. So we can see here, there's a lot more weight in the front, right? These levels are higher. So this is why it's showing us the methylation, especially of this estrone, is not moving very well. We want to balance that race car out. That 4-hydroxy tends to be fast and dangerous. We want to make sure there's less DNA damage and movement towards the back tires here. So hopefully we can help this by supporting methylation. Feel free to use that analogy if it helps you. If it doesn't, feel free to ignore it. That's the way my brain thinks through that. In the corticoid section, the cortisol and cortisone are plotted together for quick information. You can see their relationship to one another. And then, so we see cortisol on the solid line, cortisone, the dotted line. You can also see this nice dial here on the left telling you that this patient is really favoring cortisol. That will give you information, which I don't have a lot of time to dive in today, but I just wanted to give you a brief overview. Some of the information that the urine testing provides that other mediums can't is really this movement of analytes from one to another. So it's allowing us to extrapolate information about functional enzyme activity. I think that's one of the best parts of this test. So the 3 areas that we've highlighted on the summary page we find to be most clinically useful, looking at 5-alpha reductase activity. We don't want a lot of 5-alpha reductase. We want more 5-beta. So this is actually a good thing. Aromatase activity. Aromatase is a nasty enzyme. We don't want too much activity there. So we'll see, hey, is testosterone moving to estradiol? Is androstenedione moving to estrone? Can we help to calm that down? And then we have methylation activity. 4-hydroxyestrone, is that moving to 4-methoxyestrone? In this case, there's quite efficient methylation, which is great. So it will give you kind of a bird's eye view there. If you think about this test in neighborhoods, and that's how it's patterned and laid out, so you understand the flow of the test, that will be helpful. So we have 4 neighborhoods: progesterones, corticoids, androgens, and estrogens. This is represented here, or represented on the second page. This is the overall entire steroid hormone cascade. It's also dynamically reported and color-coded, just like that horseshoe shape was on the first page. So this is displaying your actual patient results to you right here. And so you can see at a glance markers that are high or abundant, markers that are low and that are maybe a lack of abundance, and then levels that are within range. So it's a really nice bird's eye view. You can see the whole thing, how it's all put together right there on that second page. Again, 3 different patients. They're going to look 3 different patterns. We have patient 1, 2, and 3. These are all going to correspond to that individual patient's highs and lows. And then the report moves into next, after that summary page and the second page, we're going to move into the neighborhoods, and we're just breaking them down by each neighborhood section. So you'll see the progesterones, you'll see the corticoids, the androgens, and the estrogens. There's somewhat of a, if you want to call it like a heat map to show patients' highs and lows, or abundant and lack thereof. You'll see that this looks familiar from the estrogen section. And then you can see that on the second page with all the other sections or neighborhoods laid out. And then there's more detail here. We're giving a histogram view of every single analyte with their reference ranges and the actual data that we're pulling from to call this high or low or within range. And then there is also this section here, which is showing ratios. And this is really nice because you can start to see the methylation activity in more detail. This is actually showing not just the estrone, which you'll see on the summary page, but we're also showing the methylation of estradiol. You might find this really interesting because it doesn't always match. Sometimes estrone is methylating effectively and estradiol doesn't seem to be. So this is a new way of looking at this that wasn't available before on this type of testing. And so it's giving you more detail, might give you some more information into your patient's methylation activity. This is another report here. And looking at the estrogen section, I just pulled this down so you can see that this is representative here of some of this methylation activity, but in more detail. So this one and this one we're seeing right here, but we're also adding in estradiol. In this case, you can see great methylation for estrone, not so much for estradiol. So it does allow us to see more detail about that and not assume just because estrone is methylating that estradiol is as well. So the last pages of the report will give commentary based on the patient's highs and lows. Anything that's within the reference range, including upper range or low range, will not receive a comment. So these are general ideas that you can start to think about as far as the reason that some of these may be high or low or abundant or lack thereof. This is another patient's estrogen section. I wanted to show you this. It's going to look quite different because this is a postmenopausal patient on hormone replacement. What we've done is provide this section so that you can see, as a postmenopausal patient on this hormone replacement, you can see her levels are showing up abundantly. If you wanted to think about this clinically, how does this compare to if the patient, and I was shooting for premenopausal levels, we've put these in this white little arrow here. So you can see how that compares. We've also provided these reference intervals, reference ranges for premenopausal patients. So it's just allowing you to see these two different areas through a different lens. So you can choose to use that clinically or not, but that might be helpful to many of you. And we got feedback too that would be helpful. So we've added that on. These are ratios and calculations. Remember, these are not going to change based on adding these premenopausal ranges. Those are always going to stay the same. But again, interpret this with whatever lens is helpful to you. Now, what I've been talking about so far is the full hormone and urinary metabolites assessment profile, but Dr. State is also providing smaller profile sections for those of you who want to look at just specific neighborhoods in the areas of the hormone cascade. So keep in mind, the full HuMap is the only way you're going to get that summary page and the entire hormone cascade of the second page, of course. But say you were treating your patient and you saw some issues in the estrogen section and you wanted to make sure those were improving. This might be a great way to come back, several months later and look at just the estrogen metabolites profile without having to do the whole test again. So you're welcome to do that. I did want to mention, you might be wondering, when do I consider running this test on which patients, right? So, the metabolism of hormones is much like a human fingerprint. It is inherently unique to each individual, and understanding what that looks like is really hard to do with clinical history and symptoms sometimes. So testing is a way that we can really deduce what that looks like under the hood, if you will. You can test hormones in different mediums. Salivary testing is available, serum testing, urine testing. Urine is the test that is going to stand out because you're able to measure the metabolism of those endogenous and supplemented hormones. We do want to keep in mind that the metabolism is looking at the end point of this entire equation of the balance for our patient's body. It's not always going to be directly reflective of tissue levels. It can correlate, but it's not always going to be that way. So you just have to remember we're a couple steps beyond the bioavailable tissue level that's at the patient. So as long as we're thinking about that, we can use the HuMap in great ways. We can assess phase 1 and phase 2 detox. We can look at potential risks and methylation function, kind of get information about digestive and liver function as well. So I've listed potential reasons you might be curious about estrogen metabolites, oxidative stress markers, androgen metabolites, the glucocorticoids, and the progesterone metabolites. I don't want to go into too much detail here just to keep this nice and brief and efficient for you. I do want to mention what makes our test stand out, just DDI in general and the HuMap specifically. We love that summary page. I think a lot of practitioners are telling us they're loving it just because it's so useful right off the get-go, right? This test is quite long, so you can get kind of lost in the details, but if you lean on that summary page, it's going to be really helpful. The fact that it's dynamically reported is one of my favorite parts of that as a clinician, because I'm so visually inclined, and if you are too, you'll really like just seeing that color-coded levels show up right away. We have multiple ways to look at enzyme activity. We've got a 5 to 7 day turnaround time for the profile. We have increased sensitivity and accuracy, especially at the low end of the range. And I'll describe that a little bit more as we go, but it's specifically because we have a liquid sample here. So strict water limitation is not necessary. We have very competitive pricing. And you have the ability to add on neurotransmitter or amino acid testing, which is also done in a liquid urine sample. The lab can actually add that on to the same HuMap sample, so your patients don't have to collect additional things. You have access to the entire DDI catalog, which is extensive. GI testing is amazing. You can look at beta-glucuronidase. We have methylation profiles. You can also look at salivary hormones. I've had providers do those side by side, kind of at the same time, salivary profiles and the HuMap, which is really great. You can look at cortisol awakening response, diurnal point cortisol testing for HPA axis. You can monitor transdermal hormone supplementation with our catalog. And again, because the HuMap specifically is a liquid sample, those paper strips aren't necessary for patients. Our liquid sample runs through LCMS, so that's going to allow for testing of metabolites that are so small they may have not been available to you before in clinical practice. So we can actually test the parent or the unconjugated form of progesterone that's found in the urine. We can get DHEA rather than DHEAS. We can do allopregnenolone, which is really nice. So you can see the movement of oral progesterone supplementation. We can look at androstenedione. We also have included, as I've mentioned, the additional estradiol ratios. So you can see the methylation of estradiol, not just estrone. So that main advantage of the liquid sample is that enhanced sensitivity, especially in those low concentrations for metabolites. The dried urine has to be reconstituted from the filter paper once the sample arrives at the lab. So that reconstitution actually can lead to a loss of polar steroid metabolites and actually creatinine, which is really important. Creatinine is used as a calculation marker in urine testing for every single thing that's used to test from that sample. So it's really important that that creatinine is exact and is used correctly. With liquid urine, the samples can be shipped after being frozen for 4 to 6 hours. So that process, we can process it faster. We can concentrate it even further if we need to enhance the detection of low-level analytes. And then the hormones and metabolites are quite stable in liquid urine if the correct preservative is used, which we certainly provide. Okay. These sometimes gets confusing, how is this different from serum or saliva testing? And mostly, we really are talking about steroid hormones. They are fat soluble. And so they have to be bound to a carrier protein to move around in the serum or conjugated into metabolites, which are water soluble as in urine. So you're always having to kind of get through that challenge when you're doing testing in a water soluble environment. So really the saliva is more favorable to measuring fat soluble tissue level hormones. When the blood is filtered through the salivary glands, only that free or unbound portion passes through the salivary duct into the saliva. And that's just a really important concept to always remember. Urine is not necessarily providing a direct measure of bioavailable hormones like saliva is, but rather it is providing the unconjugated sex hormones. Sometimes I call these the parent hormones. So estradiol, progesterone, testosterone that's been excreted in the urine, and the conjugated metabolites that have been excreted. So, it's the best way to look at urine is the best way to see essentially what is the body getting rid of and what pattern and what direction is it being broken down. That's really where it shines. Okay. So again, because I think this is confusing, I'll add another slide here that might help. So salivary testing is measuring the active bioavailable unbound portion of sex hormones that's representative of what's at the tissue level. You can use it very well to monitor any type of BHRT or HRT administration. And it's really, I argue, the most effective way to accurately measure transdermal hormones. So whether that's, whatever route of administration. The HuMap is looking at those unconjugated hormones and conjugated metabolites. So it's looking at what is the body clearing, what is the pattern and direction at which that's being broken down. Very, very valuable information, just two different sides of the same equation. What's starting at the tissue level, saliva, how is it exiting, how is it being broken down? That's urine, okay? Doctor's Data provides both saliva and urine testing, so whichever you need, do not worry, we have it for you. There is, I think, a lot of confusion about which medium is best for monitoring hormone replacement. So you can see here a table that we've created just to break down each section. I'm not going to go into a ton of detail because I think this can be, there's a lot of nuance here and a lot of explanation. I will give you a couple of resources here. If this does still confuse you, I'll provide some resources at which we've gone into more depth about this. But I would say that urinary testing isn't the best way to understand. Say you're giving your patient an oral hormone replacement or topical. This is not the best way to use this test to see, hey, is the level, the dose that I'm providing correct? Because of all this nuance, which I will save you from, but just know that it's not the best way to do it. It is the best way to understand, say, for instance, oral progesterone. That moves to allopregnenolone. We love it for that reason. It can provide anti-anxiety effects. Obviously, oral progesterone protected to the endometrium if you're using estrogen replacement. And it's also going to help with insomnia by stimulating those GABA receptors. So if you're giving oral progesterone, you may see these levels really moving towards this pathway, pushing this pathway rather than this pathway. And that's simply showing us, hey, this oral progesterone is moving in this direction and providing more allopregnenolone. So hopefully that makes sense. You can see the metabolites and the downstream effect from some of these hormone replacements. You won't always see that with topicals. They're not going through portal circulation. They're not ending up in the urine and the stool unless they're being super physiologically dosed. But I would argue it's misleading to use these values to say, is this hormone replacement level correct? Is this dose correct for my patients? Okay. So I don't believe that using also these unconjugated levels, so actually the estrogen, progesterone, testosterone in the test is going to be the best way to use this test either. What I do think this test is great for is looking at, again, the metabolism, what is the pattern and direction at which this is flowing through the body? And that's giving us so much information about liver health, digestive health, enzyme function, methylation, all of those very important things. As I promised, here is a webinar going into great detail about this, as well as a Townsend Letter article that was written by our Director of Education, Dr. Lylan Ferris. It's a great overview. So a few things to note here about the instructions. These are included in every single kit. I want to point out this QR code will be very helpful. Have your patients look at that QR code. It will give the best practices for specimen collection. It should help answer any questions that patients might have. The collection instructions are on page 5 here of this pamphlet that's included in the kits. So it will tell patients to collect urine at dinner time, bedtime, waking, and 2 hours post-waking. There is a 5th tube in case patients are urinating in the middle of the night, and we want to capture those levels as well. Do ask your patients to just carefully read this preparation section. It's going to save you a lot of time, a lot of hassle from them calling you or messaging you, asking about little details like this. There's dosage intervals, recommendations there for administration of hormone therapy. We have information about foods or substances that can interfere with testing, so things to avoid. And remember, because it's a liquid sample, we can add on other testing from this, urinary neurotransmitters or amino acids. This is that best practices handout that I talked about. It's available on the website. Patients can, just snap the QR code, look at all of this, and it's going to walk them through everything here, and I'll break this down. So it's giving you sections about hormone supplementation, how to do that, how to time it so that the test information will be the best for you and the patient. There are foods that people will want to avoid if they're utilizing neurotransmitter testing, so that's listed there. Again, it's appropriate for males and females, pre- and postmenopausal women. For cycling women, it's important to try to catch that luteal phase surge. And so this can be tricky when cycles are irregular, right? Especially for our perimenopausal patients, but there are guidelines here. So every single possibility, it will be listed here and can guide you and your patients. There's also a frequently asked questions portion. I've snipped just a small sample for you to see. So again, we've covered all the bases. If your patient is just reminded to read through that, it'll save you a lot of time. This is for providers. This is our reference guide to help support you with this test. If you're new to it, just run through it. It's available on our website. It just tells you how to read the report, frequently asked questions, all the possible comments that can be listed on the test are also described here, and factors that can influence hormone metabolism to think through. Now, again, we have an extensive catalog at Doctor's Data. So based on this HuMap information, some of the complementary tests that you might consider that go really well with this HuMap: neurotransmitter amino acid testing, as I mentioned, salivary testing, looking at tissue levels of sex hormones, the cortisol awakening response, melatonin even. Our GI360 test is a great stool test. It's looking at microbial abundance and diversity, which relates to hormones, and then as well beta-glucuronidase. We have methylation, very important in hormone metabolism. So we have the DNA profile, which will show genetic SNPs, but also a plasma methylation profile to see this. How is this functionally working out? And then we also have a red blood cell glutathione, which is a gold standard way to test that. Just want to show you an example of neurotransmitters. So this is a basic profile, a very comprehensive profile here, and the amino acids test. That's what those look like. This is the salivary test for sex hormones. We have a diurnal cortisol with a cortisol awakening response added to it, and this is a melatonin profile. So this is a saliva test. We have the GI360. It's a really amazing test. Just pointing out beta-glucuronidase here. This is the enzyme that can break the tight bonds between glucuronic acid and estrogen in the colon, making it so that your patient may be reabsorbing their own estrogen. So that can help provide just an additional information to HuMap analytes. We all know that methylation is hugely important for the deactivation of these reactive hydroxyl estrogen metabolites. So we have a methylation profile to look at the activity there, as well as DNA testing to look directly for SNPs. And that's what that looks like. I will say here, the HuMap test as a summary is very detailed. Please don't feel overwhelmed and lost in the details and very, sometimes we can get very linear looking at all these black and white numbers. It may not be the point here to fix every analyte and get it into the perfect within range level. We need to take one more step as providers, take this information, take a step back and look at the big picture. Okay, the HuMap test is giving us little hints to say, is my patient inflamed? What is their GI health doing? Are they aromatizing? Are they methylating? Do they have too much 4-hydroxy and that's putting them at risk? Do we see a little oxidative stress? What is their 5-alpha reductase enzyme doing? Do we need to provide maybe antioxidants to reduce their risk, or glutathione? So we need to look at these kind of bigger picture issues. These are the common themes that I find. So as complex as the test is, you'll probably find that it's going back to some of these common themes of treatments to help hint to you where to go from here. So you do need to downregulate aromatase. It's very common to do that. Do you want to upregulate methylation or COMT activity? Do you want to upregulate some of these enzymes that help support 2-hydroxy rather than 4-hydroxy? Do you want to improve digestion and elimination? Do you want to reduce oxidative stress? All of those things. I use this therapeutic order to help guide my practice. This is kind of how I think through the very basis of health to the very top. You may have a functional medicine approach that works very similarly. So use whatever tool you have in the way that your brain thinks through that. But remember to use this when you're analyzing this HuMap test and all the pages and all the numbers. and not get too linear with it, because it's really just hinting at bigger picture issues. Very common treatment considerations that you'll find over and over and over again, fruits and vegetables and fiber, cruciferous vegetables, polyphenols. You'll see green tea pop up a lot as a treatment modifier to improve health and enzyme activity, resveratrol, curcumin, NAC, all of these beautiful treatments. Please don't worry if you are new to this test and you have questions and you feel overwhelmed, you can absolutely call us. There is someone that you can talk to. We have a whole team of clinical education support available. So you just want to call this number or email our team, including myself, and we'd be happy to help you. So thank you so much for your time today, and I look forward to talking to you soon.